Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm Paul, I'm with the Dicey Review, and today we're going to be learning how to play the 1 to 4 player game, Chiseled, being released by Copper Frog Games and Grand Gamers Guild. In a game of Chiseled, players play artists who are sculpting their block of marble represented by a deck of cards over a number of rounds. Players will utilize different tools in a shared play space that will alter their deck in certain ways. Players will play this way until the end game is triggered, and they have to be careful to sculpt their deck in the right way to please the critics that will visit at the end of the game. Whoever has the most points at the end of the game is the winner. Chiseled comes with everything you see here, including 4 player reference mats, 13 tool cards, 8 critic cards, 4 check-in cards, 4 45-card sculpture decks, 24 waxed marble cards, and 1 solo score chart and challenge card. Each sculpture deck consists of 9 different head cards in 3 different colors, 9 different body cards in 3 different colors, and 9 arm cards in 3 different colors. The sculpture deck also contains 18 scrap cards. The 3 different colors relate to gold, silver, and onyx. To begin setup, shuffle the tool cards and deal 7 illustrations side up in the middle of the table. It's important to note that in a 4-player game, 9 tools will be used instead. The remaining tools can be placed back in the box. Then, deal each player a player reference mat, and give them the sculpture deck that matches their player color. These decks will need to be shuffled and placed on the left side of the player mat as a draw pile. Any unused player components can be returned to the box. Then, give each player a check-in card. Next, shuffle the 8 critic cards, and deal out 3 to the middle of the table. These cards will provide in-game scoring bonuses for all players. Then give each player one of the leftover critic cards, which they can turn over, and use to place on their check-in card to track the game timer. The back of the critic cards also provide a turn reference. Each player will then draw a starting hand of 3 cards. The player who has the most chiseled chin will go first. Alternatively, you can decide this randomly. After this has been done, you're ready to play. Beginning with the start player, each player will take 1 full turn. A player's turn will begin by sculpting. To sculpt, a player selects any face-up tool card, turns the tool card face down, and then completes the associated action on the tool card. In this example, the player would either be able to trash 1 card from their hand, or return 1 card from their trash pile to their discard pile. Trashed cards are placed above the player's player mat, and are out of the player's deck. After completing the associated action, the player would clean up. This is done by discarding any remaining cards in the player's hand to their discard pile. This is to the right of their player mat. The next step of a player's turn is to plan. This is simply done by drawing 3 cards from the top of their deck. Next, each player consults the critics. They check to see if they've drawn 3 cards that show either gold, silver, or onyx. In this case, only 2 cards showing those symbols were drawn. If a player has drawn 3 cards that show those symbols, then they would move the marker on their check-in card down 1 space, indicating that the game is 1 step closer to being finished. When the check-in card reveals a 0, the game end will be triggered. In this example, only 2 symbols were drawn, so the check-in card wouldn't be moved. Then, it would be the next player's turn in clockwise order. It's important to note that on a player's turn, they can only use action cards that are face up. So for instance, this action card couldn't be selected. At the beginning of any player's turn, if all of the action cards are face down, they will all be immediately turned face up, and then the player can select from any of the actions. If any player's check-in card reaches 0, the game end will then be triggered. Every other player will then take 1 last turn, and then you'll move to scoring. Now that we've looked at a general overview of a turn, let's look at what each action card does in detail. The rasp simply allows a player to trash 2 cards from their hand, placing them in the trash pile above their player board. Any remaining cards would be discarded. The mallet says that a player must trash all the cards from their hand. The pointed chisel says that a player has to trash one card from their hand or from their discard pile. The sledge states that a player has to trash 2 cards from their hand and the top card of any player's draw pile. The flat chisel states that a player would draw the top 3 cards from their draw pile and then trash any scrap drawn. Any remaining cards in their hand would be discarded as usual. The toothed chisel says that a player has to reveal the top 2 cards of their draw pile, trash one, and discard the other. The wax card says a player can trash 1 card from their hand, or they can return 1 card from their trash pile to their discard pile. The saw says that a player has to name gold, silver, or onyx. They'll draw and trash cards from the top of their draw pile until they trash a card with the type that they named. With the rounded chisel, a player has to reveal their hand. They name 1 type of card and trash all of the cards of that type from their hand. With this tool, a player will draw 4 cards in addition to their hand of 3. They would then trash 2 cards from their hand, and then place the remaining cards face down on top of their deck in any order that they choose. The polishing rag says that a player has to trash 1 card from their hand, and then they draw an additional card for their next turn. So on this player's next turn, they would have a hand of 4 cards instead of 3. With the polishing stone, a player can trash up to 1 card from each draw pile. For each card that they trashed, they would draw an additional card for their next turn. With the jackhammer, a player would trash 2 cards from the top of their draw pile. If both of the cards trashed this way are scrap, gold, silver, or onyx, the player would repeat this action until they don't draw cards that match that way. Once the game end has been triggered, each player will score their sculpture, which consists of all of the cards in their deck, hand, and discard pile, and then the players will check the 3 face-up critics to see if they score bonus points. Let's start by checking the player's sculpture score. The player mat will give a reference of how to score a player's sculpture based on how many types of cards are left in their deck. In this example, our player has 4 body cards left in their deck. With 4 body cards, a player would score 12 points. This player also has 2 arm cards in the deck, so they would score the maximum amount of 12 points. They have 8 head cards left in the deck, which would score them 16 points. And finally, they have 1 remaining scrap, which would subtract 3 points. Each scrap card in a player's sculpture at the end of the game will give them negative points. After a player has checked the points from their sculpture, they would check each of the face-up critic cards to see if they score points based on what's in their trash pile. The critics look at cards in a player's trash pile to see if they score bonus points. The player mat recommends that a player's trash pile be sorted by color, so at the end of the game it might look something like this. And it's also important to note that a player's trash pile and discard pile are public knowledge. We won't look at all of the critic cards, we'll use these 3 as an example, but all of the critics score in similar ways. In this example, our player would score 4 bonus points if their trash pile contained 5 or more onyx cards. They have exactly 5, so they would score this bonus. The player would also score 4 bonus points if they have an even number of scrap in their trash pile or 0 scrap in their trash pile. This player has 17 of the 18 cards in their trash pile, so they wouldn't score this bonus. And finally, the player would score 4 bonus points if they have more silver in their trash card than onyx. Our player has 6 silver and 5 onyx, so they would score this bonus as well. The player with the highest score would be the winner, and if there's a tie, the player with the fewest cards remaining in their sculpture deck is the winner.